The year is 1258. Mongol armies have shattered the walls of Baghdad, the richest city on earth. For 7 days they burn it. And then they come for the libraries. The House of Wisdom, 4 centuries of collected human knowledge, is thrown into the Tigris. So many books hit the water that the river is said to run black with ink for days. At the center of that loss sits one fragile thing. Not gold, not steel. Paper. That was 1258. But paper's story begins more than 11 centuries earlier, in a quiet workshop in Imperial China. Go back to the year 105, to the court of the Han Emperor. Writing already exists in China, but it is trapped by its own materials. The words of Confucius, the laws of the empire, the poetry of the court. They are carved onto strips of bamboo, tied together with cord. A single book can weigh as much as a small child. Move a library, and you need an ox cart to do it. The only lighter option is silk, smooth and beautiful, but so expensive that writing a letter on it is a luxury reserved for the very rich. An entire civilization's knowledge is being strangled by the weight of the thing it's written on. Into this problem steps a man named Kai Lun, a court official and eunuch in the emperor's service. He is not a general or a poet. In modern terms, he is something closer to the director of the imperial workshops. And he has an idea that sounds almost absurd. He is going to build a writing surface out of garbage. He gathers the bark of mulberry trees, scraps of hemp, worn-out rags, and old fishing nets. He soaks them and boils them until the fibers begin to loosen and separate. He pounds the whole mess into a wet grey pulp. Then comes the crucial trick, the moment that changes everything. He suspends that pulp in a vat of water and lowers a screen into it, drawing up a thin, even layer of tangled fiber as he lifts it out. He presses the water away, lets the sheet dry, and peels off something the world has never quite seen. Light, cheap, strong, smooth enough to take ink without bleeding. According to legend, the inspiration came from watching paper wasps chew wood into the walls of their nests. Whether or not that's true, stop and consider what Kai Lun actually pulled off. He had no concept of cellulose. He had never heard the word chemistry. He understood nothing of the microscopic bonds that lock a sheet of paper together. He simply watched, experimented, and got it right. A feat of materials science performed nearly 2,000 years before anyone on Earth could explain why it worked. Now, the honest history is a little messier than the legend. Archaeologists have found scraps of even older Chinese paper, including a fragment of a map that predates Kai Lun by more than 2 centuries. So he was probably the great improver, not the lone inventor. But it was his method, presented to the emperor around the year 105, that turned paper from a crude curiosity into something you could make in enormous quantity. He was rewarded for it, ennobled, made rich. His own ending was far darker. Years later, caught in the deadly intrigue of the palace, Kai Lun fell out of favor. Facing arrest and disgrace, the sources say he bathed, dressed himself in his finest robes, and drank poison. The man died in scandal and shame. His invention was only getting started, and China understood exactly what it was holding, which is why it moved fast to keep the secret to itself. For the next several hundred years, papermaking stayed a Chinese secret, and China put it to work in ways that still sound startling today. Paper became an instrument of the state. Under the Tang dynasty, the government ran on a strict color code. White paper for legal documents, yellow for official government business, blue for correspondence with Taoist temples. Paper was so valuable that it could be used to pay taxes and tribute. And whoever controlled the flow of paper controlled the machinery of a vast empire. The census, the tax rolls, the records, the orders that moved armies across a continent. It went far beyond paperwork. Chinese soldiers marched into battle wearing armor made of paper. Folded and layered into thick pleats, it weighed roughly a third of what iron did. And here's the strange part, it worked. One Tang governor is recorded outfitting 1,000 men in pleated paper armor, and the accounts say it could turn aside heavy arrows. Cheaper than steel, lighter to carry, and good enough to save a life. The Chinese wrapped their tea in paper. They made hats and window screens, and even mattresses from it. And, centuries ahead of everyone else, they used it as toilet paper. By the Ming Dynasty, a single imperial workshop was producing hundreds of thousands of sheets of toilet paper a year, just for the court. But paper's most important partnership was with the written word itself. In the year 868, a man named Wang Jie commissioned a printed scroll of a Buddhist text called the Diamond Sutra. It survives today as the oldest dated printed book in the world, printed almost 600 years before Gutenberg. And at the very end of it is a line that stops you cold. It was made, it says, for free and universal distribution. Knowledge, printed on paper, deliberately meant to be given away. For 6 centuries, China guarded the recipe. Then, on a riverbank in Central Asia, the secret slipped through its fingers. The year is 751. 2 empires collide near the Talas River, in what is now Kyrgyzstan. On one side, the armies of Tong China, pushing west along the Silk Road. On the other, the armies of the Abbasid Caliphate, pushing east. The Chinese are crushed, and thousands are taken prisoner. And here the traditional story takes over. Among those Chinese captives, it is said, were men who knew the secret of making paper. Marched back to the great city of Samarkand and put to work, they let loose the knowledge China had guarded for 600 years. In one battle, the secret was out. Now, historians debate this one, and they should. There's solid evidence that paper was already trickling into Central Asia before that battle ever happened, so the captured paper makers may be more legend than fact. But whether it arrived in a single dramatic stroke, or seeped across the border over decades, the result was identical. The Islamic world embraced paper with an enthusiasm Europe would not match for hundreds of years. By the year 794, there was a working paper mill in Baghdad. Muslim craftsmen refined the whole process, switching to linen and cotton rags, developing new methods of sizing suited to the flow of Arabic script. Paper spread across a civilization that treasured the written word. And we still carry a fossil of that moment in English. The word ream, the way we still count paper by the 500 sheets, comes straight from the Arabic word rizma, meaning a bundle. That decision, to take a captured craft and build something greater on top of it, seemed small at the time. It wasn't. It laid the foundation for one of the great golden ages of human learning. Meanwhile, across the Mediterranean, Europe took one look at this cheap foreign material and recoiled. To understand why Europe distrusted paper, you have to understand what it was already using, and how fiercely attached it was to it. For more than 1,000 years, serious European writing lived on parchment, animal skin, scraped, stretched, and dried into a surface for ink. The name itself comes from the city of Pergamon, in what is now Turkey. According to the Roman writer Pliny, parchment was perfected there out of pure spite. The kings of Egypt, jealous of Pergamon's growing library, cut off its supply of papyrus to starve it. So, Pergamon turned to animal skin instead, and a petty rivalry between 2 libraries handed the world a new way to write. Parchment was durable, gorgeous, and brutally expensive. Producing a single large Bible could consume the skins of an entire flock. By some estimates, more than 200 animals for one book. That cost built an entire industry of parchment makers and landowners, and that industry had absolutely no interest in being replaced by a sheet of pressed rags. So when paper arrived from the Muslim world, Europe met it with suspicion bordering on contempt. It was foreign. It was cheap. And worse, in the eyes of many Christians, it was tainted. A product of Islamic civilization, and therefore not to be trusted. The prejudice ran all the way to the throne. In the year 1221, the Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick II, issued a decree declaring that any official document written on paper was invalid. If it mattered, it went on skin. Sit with that for a second. The most transformative information technology since writing itself sat inside Europe for generations, dismissed as the flimsy, suspicious paper of foreigners. The very material that would one day carry the Bible into every household was, for a time, forbidden from carrying anything that counted. It took one stubborn German craftsman to change all of that. And when he didn't just rescue paper. He turned it into a weapon. His name was Johannes Gutenberg, and around the year 1450, in the city of Mainz, he assembled a machine out of borrowed ideas, the wine press, metal casting, oil-based ink, and gave the West movable type. But movable type alone was not the revolution. The revolution was what he printed it on. Parchment was far too expensive to feed a machine that could throw off pages by the hundred. Paper could. Cheap, abundant, endlessly reproducible paper was the fuel that made mass printing possible. Marry the two, and something without precedent in human history happened. Consider the arithmetic of the old world. A single monk, copying by hand, might spend a year or more producing one Bible. In all of Europe, after centuries of patient labor, there existed perhaps 100,000 manuscripts, total. Then Gutenberg printed his famous Bible around 1455, roughly 180 copies, most of them on paper, a handful on the old vellum, and the presses did not stop. By the year 1500, just 45 years later, Europe held an estimated 15 million printed books, from 100,000 to 15 million, inside a single human lifetime. For the first time ever, an idea could outrun the authorities trying to contain it, and someone was about to prove exactly how dangerous that was. In 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther posted a list of grievances against the Catholic Church on a door in Wittenberg. Others had challenged the church before him and been quietly silenced. But Luther had paper, and Luther had the press. Within 2 years, an estimated 300,000 copies of his writings were circulating across Germany. He translated the Bible into everyday German so that ordinary people could read the sacred text for themselves, without a priest standing between them and the words. The church had held a monopoly on knowledge for 1,000 years. Cheap paper and movable type shattered it in a decade. Because the same machinery that carried Luther's protest carried everything else too. Scientists could finally publish their findings across a continent and build on one another's work instead of losing it. A discovery made in one country could be read, tested, and improved in another within months. Knowledge stopped being a private treasure locked in a monastery and became something that piled up, out in the open, page by page. And this is where the story stops being about a quiet workshop in China and becomes the story of the modern world itself. If you're finding this story as remarkable as I am, take a second to subscribe. Here at Common Lore, we dig up the hidden history behind ordinary things every single week. And you are not going to want to miss where this one goes next. Once ideas could travel on paper, the map of the world began to move. The Reformation that Luther set off tore Christendom in two, igniting wars, redrawing borders, and deciding which kings would answer to Rome and which would break away for good. The scientific revolution accelerated because experiments could finally be published, argued over, and repeated. And when the great revolutions came, in America, in France, they were fought as much on paper as on any battlefield. Pamphlets, declarations, constitutions. The founding documents of the modern age were, quite literally, ideas pressed onto sheets of pulp. Paper even reinvented money itself. Long before the West caught on, Song Dynasty China had begun printing the world's first true paper currency, back in the 11th century, when merchants grew exhausted from hauling heavy strings of metal coins from town to town. When the explorer Marco Polo saw the Chinese using paper money under the Mongols, he could barely believe his eyes. Humble sheets of mulberry bark that everyone accepted as if they were solid gold. The idea was so powerful and so easy to abuse that China eventually printed far too much of it, spiraled into ruinous inflation, and abandoned paper money altogether for a time in the 14th century. That is the strange double nature of this material. The same sheet that could carry a prayer could carry a promise, a protest, a battle plan, or a lie. Empires learned to run on it. Every census, every tax record, every command now moved on paper. And an empire that runs on paper can be governed at a scale no ox cart full of bamboo could ever hope to reach. But there was still one barrier left standing. For all its cheapness, paper was still made, sheet by sheet, from rags. And the world was about to run out of them. By the 1800s, the presses of Europe and America were hungrier than they had ever been, and they all devoured the same thing: cotton and linen rags. Old clothes, essentially. For centuries, paper had been recycled underwear and worn-out shirts, pulped and pressed into pages. Then, in 1799, a Frenchman patented a machine that could pour out paper in one long, continuous sheet instead of one page at a time. Refined by a pair of English brothers named Fourdrinier, it could produce dozens of times more paper than a person working by hand. The machine was ready. The problem was the rags. There simply weren't enough old clothes in the entire world to feed it. What came next is one of the stranger chapters in industrial history. Desperate papermakers tried grinding up nearly anything they could find. Straw, grass, manure, even hornets' nests. And there is a persistent, hotly disputed legend from this era that American mills, starving for cloth, imported the linen wrappings of Egyptian mummies to pulp into paper. Historians still argue over whether it ever truly happened at scale. But the fact that anyone took the idea seriously at all tells you just how brutal the rag shortage had become. The real solution arrived in the 1840s, when inventors in Germany and Canada figured out how to make paper from wood pulp. Suddenly, the raw material wasn't scarce at all. It was an entire forest. Paper went from precious to practically infinite, and it never looked back. And here is where it all lands today. The world now produces something on the order of 400 million metric tons of paper and paperboard every single year. China alone makes around 140 million tons of it. And roughly 2/3 of that isn't for writing anything at all. It's packaging, the boxes and cartons that carry everything you order online. In the wealthiest countries, the average person now goes through close to 200 kilograms of it a year. Nearly your own body weight in paper, every year, mostly without noticing. Now here's the part that catches people off guard. That bill in your wallet? In the United States, it isn't paper at all. It's about 3/4 cotton and 1/4 linen. The same family of fibers that keeps your tea bag from falling apart in hot water, that filters your morning coffee, that lines the casing of a sausage, is quietly holding up systems you never stop to think about. Paper stopped being a thing you write on a long, long time ago. It became infrastructure, which brings us back to that river. In the year 1258, in Baghdad, the ideas of a golden age were dumped into the Tigris until the water ran black with ink. It was a reminder, written in the darkest way imaginable, of what paper had become. Because by then, paper wasn't just a thing anymore. It was memory. It was law. It was faith and science and rebellion, all of it resting on something you could tear apart with your bare hands. Follow the whole arc, and it barely seems believable. It was pieced together from tree bark and old fish nets. It was guarded as a state secret. It armored soldiers, and it wrapped tea. It was banned in Europe as the paper of foreigners. Then it broke the church, it printed the money, and it carried the revolutions that built the modern world. And it's still here. Right now, it's the book on your shelf, the note stuck to your counter, the cash in your pocket, the box waiting at your front door. The most powerful information technology ever invented, right up until the screen you're watching this on. And we barely spare it a glance. Empires rose on it. Empires fell over it. And all of it began with one court official who looked at a pile of rags and fishnets and saw something the rest of the world would take 1,000 years to understand. If this story surprised you, subscribe to Common Law and tell me down in the comments which part of the history of paper caught you most off guard. And leave a like. It helps more people find their way to this one.